Chinatown's history is really tied to the earliest days of San Francisco's history.
In the East Bay, however, right, there was this much more modern approach to martial arts happening,
Yeah,
right?
it's really fascinating. Bruce, he kind of gets off on the wrong foot with the Chinatown crowd, I guess,
What?
to put it mildly. But with James Lee and a lot of the martial artists in James's orbit, he really finds people just on his wavelength. The things that James was doing, sort of publishing his own books, building his own training equipment, having this very modern training environment out of his garage. James was already sort of enacting the martial arts future that young Bruce was beginning to envision. And Bruce was like, this guy is really on my wavelength. And Bruce starts to regularly travel to the Bay Area to collaborate with him. Very quickly, Bruce is creating his first book. And then the martial artists that James introduces Bruce to are also on that wavelength. And they start to have these like epic late night think tank sessions where they hang out and go around the room and all talk and all sort of demonstrate. And it's this very unique martial arts laboratory where just this great exchange of ideas is going on. And it's really sort of a key moment for where the martial arts evolves in America. So Bruce comes over from Hong Kong, and Hong Kong in the 50s had a really tenacious street fighting culture based around the martial arts schools. So the teenagers that practice at these schools, they almost formed into sort of gangs, but very much aligned along their school and their style, and they were constantly competing with their styles. The Wing Chun kids in particular really made a name for themselves, and that reputation made it to San Francisco before Bruce even got back in 1959. So by the time Bruce shows up as an 18-year-old in 59, the Wing Chun kids are already looked at in a sort of suspect manner as being very brash upstarts that maybe weren't respecting their elders in the way that they should have. And they very quickly view Bruce in that context before, they really even know him. What then starts to go on is as Bruce starts to give demonstrations, early on they're pretty innocuous, but over time they become increasingly critical of the prevailing practices in the martial arts world, the real status quo, I suppose you could say traditional practices. And coming from a young out-of-town kid, it's really not going over well. And there's very quickly a running tension. There is this antagonistic thing going on between the Chinatown and the Oakland camps. I do think that with the demonstrations that Bruce was giving, they were going over very well with some people, and they were really insulting some other people. It was a very polarizing thing. But I think it really gets to the heart of like who he was. That's really to me like one of the most interesting sides of him, that he was challenging the status quo, and even as a young guy was like very vocal about it.
Yeah, and I thought what was interesting too is that he was definitely, first of all, much younger at that point in time, so probably not as sort of had as much life experience and wisdom and able to sort of like he hadn't fully established all his philosophy at that point quite yet. So I'm sure he was coming off as arrogant and ruffling a lot of feathers and that sort of stuff. But one of the things that I thought was so interesting was that you characterized it in a way where it was like, well, but if you could take your guard down and really listen to what he had to say and really see him, then you could see that there was something to it. It wasn't just,
Definitely.
to be
a
pain in the
Ed
ass.
Parker was, Ed Parker himself said that. He said at first, Bruce came on a little strong, but the more I kind of watched what he was talking about and the more I saw that he could really back up what he was saying, he really won Ed Parker over in that regard. And that's, to me, like kind of the perfect, example of that happening.